The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Fourth Book. Quest for Uncle Kurt. Chapter 24. To all this, continued Uncle Kurt, that afternoon, the 3 days had passed by under cold dawn, saw us leaving the monastery towards the Tibet. The caravan was composed now by the 5 officers SS, 5 of the helid carriers of the Dhaka, who accepted the carriage to the Tibet, and 10 lepers Kalikas, experts in martial arts and tantric magic. The journey of the Himalayas was realized through a path only known by the monks, that avoided every population until entering well into the valley Gangri, but that was at more than 5,000 meters high, and passed next to the slope of Gangri, majestic peak of 7,600 meters. Once in the plateau of the Tibet, the country of Payul, we had to march straightly towards the north. The plan of von Grossen seemed misbegotten at the beginning, although, well looked, it wasn't. And, in fact, it produced the expected results. I consisted in to reach the shores of the Brahmaputra, that in the valley Gangri, runs parallel to the Himalayas, from west to east, and embark ourselves in a raft to navigate on its furious current. The indicated point to descend, if we didn't wreck before, would be at the 30 degrees of north latitude, and 95 degrees of longitude east, where the river Son of Brahma twists violently its course towards the south, and goes to the valleys of Bengal. With such tactic procedure, we would recover part of the time that the expedition of Ernst Schaefer surpassed us. According to the information of von Grossen, Schaefer and his men circulated through the path Yun Lam, which ended its route of 2,000 kilometers in China, and its use was only permitted to the official functionaries of the Tibet. The merchants, instead, utilized the path Chan Lam. But the operation of Schaefer, endorsed by the Dalai Lama, was almost an official mission. However, the transit through such path wouldn't be easy, due to, before reaching the Lake Kiying, seat of the gates of Shambhala, tens of obstacles had to be surpassed. To give an idea, Nifeturo, of the accidente that were those communication routes, I'll tell you that, only in 600 kilometers of its way, from Lhasa to Khemda, the path of Chan Lam surrounded more than 40 mountain ranges, by passages that were elevated between 3,000 and 5,500 meters. And, that without considering the numberless torrents and rivers, often lacking of bridges, that ran lively through the intermediary valleys. In Khemda, the caravan of Schaefer would move away from the official path and would take a footpath of pilgrim lamas, open parallel to the right shore of the river Mekong, that would transport the travelers directly to the Lake Kiying. Once there, they would go towards the monastery, or Gempa, of the Lamas of the Kirkrama bonnet, known since the antiquity as Ashram Jafran, and that we burnt. It was behind the wall of the city of the Duskas, a population of Tibetan race, famous for the variety of saffron, or Kirkrama, that they cultivated, whence they extracted the narcotic drug of ritual usage, and a tincture with which they dyed the bonnets, or tiaras of their lamas. If all went well, that is, after that they would have accepted the required victim, and opened the gates, the expedition would prosecute traveling to the environs of the Lake Kuknor, where one of the meridional extremes of the Great Wall of China, and also, or justly for that, one of the gates of Chang Shambhala. Our strategy, of course, demanded to catch Ernst Schaefer before his arrival to Ashram Jafran, because, otherwise, we would have lost Eskadfil irremediably. Anyhow, the operation that we were going to realize had been meticulously studied by von Grossen and Schmidt, and, even though the anxiety for Helbeska filled me with impatience, I had no other choice than to trust in that they were right. Thus, while the expedition of Schaefer was directed to the staggered plateaus of the eastern Tibet, crossed by tens of mountain ranges that were extended from north to south, and many other connected valleys, we were advancing at maximum speed through the plain of the valley Gangri, towards the north, trying to arrive as soon as possible to the Riviera Zaino, or High Brahmaputra. By this river, we will only navigate 400 kilometers, but, According to the appreciation of von Grossen, in 4 or 5 days, we would perambulate a distance that, by land, through the path of Yun Lam, demanded time 5 times longer. In a prefixed point of the shore, were waiting us 2 rafts of firm construction, apt to transport each one of them 10 persons, and a ton of charge, more than enough to cover our needs. The Kolikas were in charge to contract them, and the price was high, because we had to pay them the travel to Sadiga, and the cost of the tugboats that brought them again to the high Brahmaputra. The skilled ferrymen, stimulated by the promise of a great extra remuneration, or frightened for the dangerousness of the Kolikas monks, driving nimbly the tugboats through the center of the watercourse, taking advantage to the fullest the speed of the river. And meanwhile, the abundant current was approaching me rapidly to the objective of the mission. I contemplated and admired one of the sceneries more extraordinary of the earth, only comparable, in a lesser measure, to the plateau of Tohonaku, in America. Because, such river, son of Brahma, that furrowed longitudinally a cold valley situated at 4,000 meters of high, had its shores guarded by 2 mountain ranges so famous for the elevation of their mountains, as for the concepts that deserved to the most ancient religions of the humanity. At the right was extended the Himalayas, in whose system affirms the Asian tradition that is located in the Mount Mera, the Olympus of the Indos. And at the left, were the Mount Gangri, mountain range that culminates at the west with Mount Kailas, the abode of Shiva. 1 week later, we were marching to the Yushu, in the northwest, trying to accelerate the workday through the acquisition of yaks, because existed an itinerary of appages and passages that allowed to pass with those animals. After perambulating an uninterrupted set of small valleys, crossing numerous mountain belts, the overflowing river Salune, and many other minor torrents, we reached one day to the shores of the Mekong, at some 80 kilometers from Kemda. At that head, the Kolikas had already inquired that the expedition of Schaefer advanced us in just 15 days. Little time for such latitudes where the duration of the journeys was measured in months. A lot, if it was saving the life of Escadrille. Happily, the good weather accompanied us the whole journey, and it would remain thus, till the end. We passed the right shore of the Mekong, and we took the path of the Lamas, with the hope to shorten the distance that separated us from Schaefer, marching faster than his column and stopping the indispensable to rest. Anyhow, the progress was slow, until the exasperation, because the famous path consisted in a narrowed and elevated carriageway, that barely permitted the pass of the yaks, which we often had to discharge. In some place of the path, at more than 4,000 meters high, we crossed the frontier of China. At last, we arrived to Yushu, realizing that the other group of Occidentals had abandoned the city 10 days ago. The new, instead to rejoice for the gained time, it desperated us, because that city was a point included in the path Chan Lam, whereby was canalized most part of the commerce of the Tibet with China, and whereby could be transited with great velocity. Since the previous year, July of 1937, China suffered the invasion of the Japanese, who already dominated Korea and Formosa, since the war with Russia of 1905. In those days, at the end of 1938, Japan had conquered the Manchuria, and the entire meridional coast, threatening to extend inwards. Canton, Nanking, Shanghai, Peking, and so forth, had fell under its power. With a formidable movement of tweezers, they pretended now to occupy the enormous fringe, between the rivers Yangtze and Hongho, it means, between 2 rivers Blue and Yellow. In the country, reigned the social decomposition, and, in the regions that the Japanese not controlled yet, the civil war had detonated with singular violence. Yushu, situated in the occidental frontier, was far from the Japanese, but not from the civil war. In the city, existed quite agitation, and, in no way was convenient to stay at their side too much, so we remained hidden in the house of a Kolika family. They were who provided us the information about the 10 days of advance that the German expedition had over us. It had been impossible to reach them traveling in caravan as we did until then. According to von Grossen, just one alternative left: separate us from the charge, and advance by horse. The advance would be realized by the 5 Germans, and 8 monks, whereas 2 lepers would stay to guard the 5 Hellites, the Doxdavers, the yaks with their charge, and the recently incorporated Zes, which are the male hybrid product of the crossbreeding of the yak with the cow. Following this variant of the plan, the Kalikas acquired the specimens of larger size that they achieved to obtain of the small Tibetan horses, and each one took the minimum victuals for 10 days, because, in such path the merchants alternated often the villages and rest posts and provisions. The heaviest hide that we had to transport corresponded to the weapons, for which we destined 2 horses. That same day, we went out from Yushu, after sleeping just a few hours. At the next day, we waded through the Yangtze-Kiang, or Blue River, and we reached with the best highway after 40 days of journey, giving to the horses, thenceforth, considerable speed. I guess that in Yushu, to an experienced officer as Karl von Grossen, not escaped that we would never reach Schaefer, before the Leibkiying, if he had 10 days of advantage. Undoubtedly, he wanted to please in the best possible manner my desire to rescue Eskadfil, alive, perhaps, relying secretly in the possibility that, for some imponderable motive, our persecutors would stop more than usual in some point of the route. But, such thing didn't occur, and they conserved the advantage enough time as to arrive to the Ashram Jaffran, give to Eskadfil, and leave again towards the Leibkuk Nora. According to the relation of the brave Tibetan, Essen Schaefer sent Eskadfil ahead, to explore the region of the Ashram Jaffran. Once he left, was captured by the Duskers, who confined him in a temple dedicated to the cult of Rigenji Ipo, where he would be sacrificed only 4 days later, in the transition of the waning moon. Esker was still alive. Unexpectedly we disposed now of a precious lapse of time to study the rescue. Naturally that all had been planned by Schaefer, in combination with the Duskers. To avoid the compromise to give Esker, openly he made him fall in an infamous trap. He ignored such effect, until the moment when he would be betrayed by his chief. But, would not be Esker, to whom Ernst Schaefer pretended to deceit, because he would die anyway, but some German officers who evidently were not aware of his plans. The scoundrel assured to himself a brilliant alibi, because the same would inform at their return to Germany that the Kamerad Eskadfil has disappeared in action, in the course of the operational Twesten. This was what shortened the stay of the expedition in the ashram, because Schaefer didn't want to run the risk that the deceived could discover accidentally that Esker was prisoner of Duskers. Precisely, with the complicity of the Duskers, who participated hypocritically from the farce, 18 of his comrades inspected inch by inch the whole zone for 2 days trying to find him. Apparently, only 4 officers shared the secret objectives of Schaefer. The efficacy of such kolaka, to spy to Schaefer, was because he was not a mere Tibetan carrier, although he acted as such by order of his gurus, but a South African of Nepalese origin who comprehended perfectly English, German, and Dutch. His family, of Gurkha race, that's to say, Indo-Aryan, deserted during the War of the Boers, and took refuge in German territories, fleeing finally to Bhutan, after 1918, when Germany was despoiled from its colonies. As he, whose name was Bangai, as his brother Gangbai, were entrusted, since they were kids of the care of the Kalikas monks, who initiated them in the Tantra, and finally, they were separated in Lhasa, as secret agents at the service of the Dharmaraja of Bhutan. There, they achieved to be contracted by Schaefer, who took them for Sherpas, without noticing the difference of race. But, they were not the Sherpas, but 2 Gurkha warriors who professed unduly hate for the English, and that were awaiting patiently some new Britannic war, to enroll in the contrary side. The spies achieved to hear the exigencies that the traitor propounded to the lamas of the Kirkramut bonnet, and they heard how the master Walkuhal intervened in their favor, convening to cross, as soon as possible, the door of Shambhala. they become aware about the existence of an offering to XXIV, propitiated by Ernst Schaefer, and they comprehended that XXIV had been delivered by means of a stratagem. As his Calliope's partners, not reached at time to avoid the sacrifice, they would try to find out where was the prisoner to give him help, something very difficult in such village dwelled by 2,000 buskers and 500 lamas. Both brothers started to observe the surroundings of the monastery with the greatest caution, presuming aright that the prisoner had been locked in a different side from the one that the expeditionaries occupied. In fact, they verified that, in one of the exterior temples, situated over an islet of the Lake King, was locked and escorted by armed guards. They communicated the novelty to the German spies of the SD, requesting them support to discover the maneuver and liberate XXIV. The answer of one of them, typical answer of an Occidental secret agent, left the Gurkha breathless. We informed to Germany with months of anticipation the plans that Schaefer had for XXIV, and the orders that we received were clear and forthright, as you know well. Wait for special reinforcements that will prevent Ernst Schaefer the fulfillment of the operational Twesten. Signed, Heinrich Himmel Hitler. It means that there is no indication in regard to XXIV. We appreciate too much to our comrade, and we feel a lot is luck, but, in similar cases the regulation of the Secret Service avoid to act by own initiative, because it has been established with absolute precision that the priority of our mission is the operational Twesten. The rescue of XXIV conspires against the discretion that we must maintain until the end of the operational Twesten. A part of contradicting our express orders and construct a suicidal action, after which the most probable is that the sacrificed victims of these wild men be 3 instead of 1. We, in sum, will do nothing, and we request you to proceed in same way, because a lot of travel is missing yet, and we need your help to send information through the Tibet. The Gurkhas assured for the satisfaction of the SS that they wouldn't intervene, but, at discussing the case within them, they concluded that the orders of the Germans not reached them, in the same manner than the oaths made to Shiva, to combat the betrayal and cowardly. What meant the infraction to a cold bureaucratic regulation, before the wrath of Shiva, who punished the bad warriors avoiding them the access to the supreme Shathai? Didn't they swear to fight, unto death against the members of the wide fraternity? Their duties of spies of the Dharmaraja, authorized by the Khalsa Oracle, exempted them from many religious obligations, but permit the sacrifice of a human victim, in Holocaust to the chief of the wide fraternity, overpassed all the expectations. No Siddha could justify such sin, and will be surely punished in the Bhardo. No. If for the Germans, the priority was to reach the door of Shambhala, the abode of the demons, for them, the priority was the Klua, the manifestation of the divine Shathai. And the Klua would be lost, if they not acted as authentic warriors Ekla. They would opt then, to help XXIV. The second, and last night that the group of Schaefer would remain in Ashram Jafram, the Gurkhas decided to act. Without hesitate, they sank into the cold waters of the Lake King and swimming slowly surrounded the islet to emerge in the rear part of the temple. The sentinels didn't notice anything. Rapidly, they climbed up to a skylight in form of 6-pointed star that, looking to the east, at the daylight permitted, that the sunlight illuminates the enormous statue of XXIV, but that the exact day of the summer solstice directed the sunlight directly in the heart of the king of the world. Fortunately, such horrible aperture admitted the pass of a man, which was used by Gangbai, to descend throwing a rope to its interior. His brother would remain in guard in the exterior cornice. Once inside, he verified that the temple was illuminated with torches, and that, strongly tied with ropes of hemp, XXIV was sleeping upon the sacrificial stone. In front him, the chief of the Lords of Karma enjoyed anticipated only the Ushnavirya of his pain, according to what the intruder thought with shudder, at watching the rictus, and the diabolic gaze of the sinister sculpture. But, he saw something more. In the interior was also a guard. It consisted of 4 Duskers, although they were far away, next to the only door of the temple. 2 were sleeping over a mat, while the other 2 were talking pertly. The Gurkha started to crawl stealthily, trying that. The sacrificial stone intercepts the vision of the Duskers, and carrying in the mouth a sharp dagger to cut the ligatures. Momentarily hidden behind the altar of stone, the Kalika Gurkha incorporated himself too mildly, and peered above the body of Esker, the behavior of the Duskers. They continued completely distracted, entertained now playing dice. One of them slipped a hand on the face of Esker, and pressed it strongly against his mouth, with the purpose to avoid him to speak, or emit any unnecessary sound, at his awakening. However, notwithstanding, he shook him with singular violence, the prisoner not recovered his senses. Finally, he opened his eyes, but Gangbai was thin-white, with the exorbitant upwards pupils, and he comprehended and oid that the German suffered the effects of a narcotic. Nothing could be done, except to move backwards and abandon the temple. Shiva would forgive now, at least to whom had risked his life to rescue the victim from the demons. But, it was seen that the gods disposed another destiny for the Gurkha. At removing the hand from the mouth of Esker, believing him completely fainted, occurred the unthinkable. He released a penetrating threnody, and convulsed for an instant, to fall immediately in the previous fainting. The body remained inert again, but it was too late. The sentinels were running towards the altar uttering exclamations. The Gurkha jumped over the first and stabbed him, but he had to surrender then, before the threat of 2 dissuasive fusils. Another guard opened the door of the temple, and soon an angry crowd of Duskers surrounding the intruder. If Gangbai would have reckoned that with the weapons of the Kalika warriors, he'd have presented better battle, but, as the role of carrier that he represented in the expedition, could only take that knife with him hidden within his clothings. In the terrible moment, the only thing he desired was that his brother could flee. And his desire was accomplished, because the other Gurkha descended with celerity from the cornice, and ingressed in the lake, gaining the shore unseen. Hidden behind a little wall which followed the contour of the beach, he observed how minutes later Ernst Schaefer arrived accompanied by his 2 more loyal collaborators, and 6 lamas of the Kirkramut bonnet. The die of his brother was cast. In the case of being captured, both were agreed to declare that the incursion to the temple obeyed to the unique purpose of the theft. They supposed that in the temple would be objects of value that could be subtracted from the custody of Duskers, to be traded then in China, or in India, producing thus a favorable change in the life of 2 poor Sherpas. Would be executed, of course, for the committed sacrilege, and, specially, because Schaefer could not leave witnesses of the presence of Eskadfil in the temple. But, the version of the theft would remove suspicions, and wouldn't put in danger the task of the German spies. Now one of the Gurkhas, Bangai, was free, but was worthless to shelter hopes about the luck that his brother would run. He would be murdered to avoid him to speak, and present his body, thus, to the rest of the expedition, affirming that he died when he was surprised in Briganti, effectuating a theft in a temple, not in the one of Rigenji Ipo, but other to which the corpse would be transported. He was not wrong, because, after a while 2 guards went out carrying the lifeless body of Gangbai, followed by the Germans and the Lamas. At the light of the moon, he could see his neck dissected from ear to ear, having to set his jaw to avoid a scream of sorrow. He consoled himself, thinking that his brother possessed the clue, and that he would dance soon with Shiva, the dance of immortality. Kelly. Oh Kelly, he invoked mentally, communicate me your power of death, convert me, in a Shinji Bhairava. Concede me, O Parvati, the honor to revenge the life of my brother, your loyal servant. Help me to recover the dignity of the Kshatrya. Transform me, in Kebola, the force to destroy the foes of your path Klua. Put a Trishula in my hands, the trident of Shiva, Tavehra, the ray of Indra, and a Gandiva, the bow of Arjuna, with Isti, with 2 quivers of arrows, that never fail the target. While I was praying thus to the black goddess, the Gurkha was swimming feverishly to move away from the Damashram Jaffran, conscious that he would be promptly searched as accomplice of his brother, and condemned to identical execution. Once out from the walls, he climbed to a nearby mount whence he contemplated at the next morning the hasty departure of the expedition. The Germans, thought Bangai, integrated now a cortege of demons. With Schaefer, indeed, were the Master Walkuhal, and the Skushok of the Gempa, a kind of Tibet Nebud, apart from 4 lamas of the Kirkram bonnet. In that moment, comprehended that, he had 2 alternatives. Follow the caravan at a distance, risking to starve to death, and cold in few days, or come back to the path Chan Lam, and wait for the announced reinforcements, risking then, to lose the trace of the expedition, as the door of Shambhala, what meant, the entrance in a secret way that, perhaps, crossed unknown dimensions of the space, or was prolonged in other worlds. However, he opted for this last variant, having elapsed only 3 days, since they were next to the bridge Hongho.